Welcome to The Corner, La Source's digital show dedicated to the sport and entertainment industry. Every 2 weeks, we invite a professional to share their experience, background, and challenges. The sport industry moves fast, and having their insights is the best way to keep up to speed. Welcome to The Corner.
Welcome to another episode of The Corner. Today I'm delighted to receive Thomas Alomes. Thomas is a global leader in sports technology, and among many other things, he is the host of the Global Sports Technology podcast and leader of the Sports Tech World Series. With him, we've been through his journey in the sport industry and his entrepreneurial experience. We've also taken a look back at 2021 and look ahead for 2022 with a shared article that we co-wrote for Sports Pro Media. And so we've been talking about the trends around NFTs and metaverse that will be shaping the sports industry in 2022. I hope you will learn something new and have a deeper insight into future trends he outlines. Enjoy the show. Thomas, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, maybe there are plenty of Thomas in this world, so I will be a bit more explicit. It is Thomas Alomes from Sports Tech World Series, but I guess you are very famous in the sports world, so I'm sure most of the people in our podcasts knows you from a bit everywhere, maybe Sports Pro or the podcast that you run and all the different activities that you have with startups.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I was having a catch up with Roger Mitchell, who's probably in the similar space to me. He runs a podcast as well. I obviously host Sports Tech Feed, the Global Sports Technology podcast. He's on Are You Not Entertained? And he referred to us as sports influencers, sports tech influencers. So we're not on Instagram half naked, but we are trying to, I guess, put our learnings out there, talk to interesting people. And yeah, I'd probably just say, just learn as much as possible. So it's great to be on this, share some of the things that I've learned along the way, and hopefully learn something more as well.
Yeah. No need to be half naked. It's better with your expertise. And actually, I was also on a call with Roger, and told him that I listened to one of his podcasts recently around the metaverse and everything. And many of what he was referring to is clearly linked to what we've been sharing as well on the source. So it's quite funny, but we'll be talking about this, I'm sure, during this podcast. But, and I think we were all part of the same Sports Pro article. And when I read it, I didn't know you were part of the answers or Roger or the other ones. And quite surprising how not similar, but how we share, views and insights on the sports industry. But before we deep dive in that, is like every time I like to have a bit of an intro on the invitee and to know a bit better. But it's also like sports is above all a source of emotion, and so I'd like to ask why sports, and why did you come to sports? Is it that you were fanatic, like young age around sports, or nearly professional, or do you have specific memories around sports at a young age, or?
I mean, yeah, lots of memories around it. I would say kind of two different answers to that. One, in terms of my personal relationship with sports, is it's always been part of my life in some way. I would say more later in life, it's been much more about following it. Earlier, it was much more about participating, which I think is a common thread for a lot of people. My earliest memory of sports would be probably not a specific place or a person or a thing, but it would be just the smells and sounds of training. So early morning in a pool back in Australia, the smell of chlorine, the sound of kind of splashing as the sun's coming up. I'd say doing athletics when I was younger, the smell of cut grass, hearing people. It's kind of those very quintessential, kind of iconic, but very emotive responses around that. And then obviously, as I've grown older, it's more around actually attending events and things like that. So, but how I came to it professionally was not a very clear path. I studied at university. My formal studies were in behavioural studies in social psychology. So I studied, my honours thesis was on lone wolf terrorism, and then followed that up with a law degree, and very much thought I was going down the path of law, national security, things like that. Interned in Washington, D.C. with the House Judiciary Chairman, and that was the area that I was focusing on, writing policy and legal reports. And then through all those experiences, realised none of that was for me. It was very interesting, but not something I was going to leap out of bed every day and be a lawyer or be
no passion.
No. I wasn't going to do it for the next 60 years until I dropped dead. So was looking for something else. Ended up kind of through some people I studied law with, connections into the startup world, and then started with Sports Tech World Series when it was. It's been through about 2 different name changes, but when it was a kind of previous business, and what it was doing was working within data-driven industries to work on training and educating and celebrating people in those areas. So we ran competitions, conferences, things like that around that. So we ran global competitions in financial modeling, data analytics. Through that, I found
so it's through the startup world.
We'll start with a little bit, and then events, and then
events
and stuff, and things in Internet of Things, and found an Internet of Things event. And this is 6 years ago, so this is when a lot of this is still coming to the fore. And long story long, through all of those areas, it was running into data analytics, it was running into IoT. It was all these cool emerging industries that then had the best applications in sports. And so every single time we came across something in sports, that's what really struck a nerve. So kind of learning by doing about this industry. So then about 6 years ago, we just pivoted completely to sports technology. So sold off the IoT business, sold off all the other parts of the business, and just went, sports tech is this incredible emerging industry, and we want to learn more about it, and we want to be involved, and we think it's got a huge future. And then that's where it's been.
It was both like kind of you could smell, or you had the vision in terms of this is where sports is heading, or actually that where technology is having a massive impact on sports, and where like the growth of sports will be higher into the sports tech rather than the other sectors, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's technology innovation that's revolutionizing every level of our lives, and that's something that we'll talk about later with the metaverse, NFTs, Web 3.0. And sports is just part of that, but sports is also a incredible testbed for innovation. It's where lots of our parts of our lives are lived through. So that was one of those things that was, there's IoT devices that are connected devices that are used for agriculture and farming and things like that.
Yeah,
that's interesting, and that's going to have a huge economic impact. But I'm more interested in about how can you attach a device to an athlete to improve their physical performance. What can you do there? And the next evolution is now a few years later we're looking at optical tracking. So how do you do that with cameras? So sports is as a unique microcosm, and obviously everything on the fan engagement side, the kind of brand loyalty, if you'll put it, that fans have to their respective organizations is unlike any other sector in the world.
It's unique because of the community, led, or why so unique? Is it because of the passion, the emotions, and so the millions of fans that are giving up for free their time, their commitments, everything they have, or is there anything else in terms of why so unique? I mean,
I'll answer that in the sense of, so sports rights deals, for instance, so media rights deals. So the NFL just signed relatively recently $110 billion, I think it was, for their live broadcast rights. So if you look at TV, as in linear TV, so we're not talking OTT, just regular old TV, sit on the couch, turn it on, there's your channels on what that is. Viewership for that has been declining as viewership for OTT and streaming platforms has been increasing, but also just as people have been finding other interests, whether that's gaming, that's going on the internet.
Yeah.
That the amount of money that they paid for those rights reflects the role that sports has in our lives, in the sense of it is live, it's unpredictable, it has this passion and connection. You can't really replicate it in other areas necessarily. There's just something about it, just that X factor that brings all these parts together. And that's just on the spectator side. And then you think about the participation side, and you think about what that means for people to move their bodies, for health, both mental and physical. And there's a whole part of that. So I don't buy into as much of the idea of, the Olympic ideals of sports brings people together and then everything's harmonious and stuff. We've seen things with sports washing with that maybe not living up to where it is. But I do think that it is something incredibly unique and incredibly human about the passion we feel for sports. And that crosses boundaries, because someone's hamstring, if they're playing football and they strain a hamstring, funnily enough, a hamstring is built the same in Indonesia as it is in Lithuania. We're all people in terms of the human body is the same. So there's that kind of idea that it's unique. And in the same as way that passionate fandom, like if you have two countries competing against each other in a sport, fans on both sides screaming different languages, different kind of cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, whatever else it is, that feeling and that connection they have is the same.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. From what you just said, and I will take a step back, but let me start from the beginning. So you said swimming and athletic. Does it mean that now you are a triathlon, or that when you were young, you mentioned the swimming pool and the running?
Yeah, so actually when I was younger, I did little athletics in Australia, and I hated every minute of it. I did swimming. I loved that. And then, somehow later in life, I've come back to that. I do ultra endurance events, so Ironmans and marathon swimming. So in 2019, I swam the English Channel, which is
wow.
Yeah, it was a bit of fun. I would say I think you're in Paris. I think that next time, I was living in London at the time, and I've got the TGV, I've got the train before, so I would recommend anyone looking to get from London to Paris, probably get the train. You can even get cheap flights, but swimming is probably one of the harder ways to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So now going back to the pivoting moments where you moved to more on the sports tech and the entrepreneur and the startup side of things. One of the questions, because you're also a startup mentor and you've seen a lot of, I guess, tech teams. What I know there is not one recipe, and for every startup there is potentially a different answers or a different vision, but what are more or less the key ingredients for a recipe for the startups to be managed successfully, according to you?
So there's the internal and the external. Internal is how you run your business and your team.
Yeah, I would say internally more like for entrepreneurs out there, like C-levels, having their own startups. What would be the best advices that you can give them to run their business?
Well, I mean, internally it would be look at how you run your team. Understand that you are to be able to grow, you're going to need to hire. That is one of the most important things. So I think this cliche of the obsessive, abusive manager doesn't fly. The whole Steve Jobs is a creative genius, and that entitles you to be a bit of an awful person to work for or work with. There's not really any sustainability in that. So that's, I would say, a little bit of a myth. Look after your team, look after yourself as well in terms of your health, your mental health, stress loads, things like that, sleep. That's all fundamentals. And then look at externally, it's product market fit. It's one of the biggest things is do you have a technology solution looking for a problem, or is there a problem that you're clearly solving? So that's something, especially within sports tech, you need to make sure that you're actually solving problems out there. So that's really just about getting out there and listening to your customers. And the other thing is, don't give it away for free. That is probably one of the biggest pitfalls I see from startups that think, I'll just sign a big major soccer club or an NFL club, and I'll give it to them for free. And then once I've got that logo on my website, I'll be able to get 10 others. Say, if they don't value it enough to pay for it, they're not going to value it enough to promote it, to actually use it to its full extent. Even if it's something like, I know a human performance company that do human performance measurements and tracking, and they'll give away free samples, but they'll charge postage. So they'll say, yes, we'll give you a free sample, you can have a go at it, but I mean, it's a big unit, it's going to be $250 worth of shipping. You have to raise an invoice for that. You have to do all these steps. If they're not committed to even pay what is relatively a minor amount for that, that's a pretty good indication that they don't want to become a customer. So
I really like that.
Yeah. So although at the beginning of an entrepreneurial journey, it's very easy to think, oh, well, I just give it away for free and I'm stressed about getting customers and getting traction. You're kind of setting yourself up for failure if you attempt to do that.
To be honest with you, like when you were mentioning the market fit, I was about to ask you around the proof of concept, and I would say the trends also in startups to chase logos and tractions while not being paid. And actually we had an article on proof of concepts and what it is and why it should be paid. And actually we had also a session with Ignition, and Samuel, the CEO of La Source, was also explaining to the startup people, like, make sure there is a price on your product or your service, because otherwise, I mean, you're killing yourself. You're also killing your business. And I really like this idea, but I think it's becoming more and more heard and relevant than it used to be, maybe like even 2 or 3 years ago, in terms of like, make sure you get paid even at proof of concept stage if you want, because that's something you are providing a service. And if, like you said, big clients or even like tier 2, tier 3 organization are not willing to pay anything for this, it means it's not the right path, I guess, or that the market fit is not there anyway. Yeah. So you need to find the other way around to make sure that works. All right, cool. Maybe not on the mindset or anything, but there's also something I wanted to ask you about, is the Sports Innovation Texas. Is it something related to, I guess it's not related at all to Sports Tech World Series, but I guess now you're based in Texas, and I was wondering what it is. Can you tell us a bit more on what that is, and how does this like compare, or is it different to Sports Tech World Series?
Yeah, so Sports Tech World Series, as I described, is the day job. So that's global sports technology, research advisory, consulting platform, underpinned by content media that basically kind of cycles into that. So our bread and butter is helping sports tech vendors, governments, investment funds, and sports organizations separate, what's meaningful, impactful in sports technology and what's just hype. That's the way that we are is at the core of our business. And then what supports that is an ecosystem of content, events, things like that. So we run a big Australian Sports Innovation Week, which is supported by the Queensland government, obviously in the lead up to the 2032 Olympics. Pre-COVID, we used to run some more events around the world. We've really pivoted to virtual for a lot of those, and Australia's the only one that we run there at the moment. And then obviously I host the podcast as well, which is a great opportunity to learn. And those learnings are things that I then feed into our consulting clients. So saying, so-and-so from this organization, this is what keeps them up at night. This is the problems they're having. How can we then help with solutions? So that's the day job. And then Sports Innovation Texas came about because I moved to Austin, Texas, the state capital here a few years ago. I had the good fortune of marrying a Texan, so I'm kind of good. So Yeah, Austin's a great city, and it's interesting coming from Australia. I was in Melbourne, Australia, then I moved to London in the UK to lead our business there. Coming from those two places, which are really big sports ecosystems, but very well connected. So Australia obviously has the Grand Prix, the Australian Open tennis, and a whole bunch of other sporting events, AFL Grand Final, but a very engaged and committed community. London is similar. There's a whole network of things that are happening in that space. I came to Austin, and there wasn't really a unified, I guess, organization or community that existed. There was a lot of really interesting, cool stuff happening. People don't think of Austin as a sports city because it didn't until last year. It didn't have a major league team. It's now got Austin FC in the MLS. It's got University of Texas at Austin, the Longhorns. For people not familiar with the college system, they're the biggest revenue-generating collegiate athletics system.
Oh, wow.
So they would be, I'm trying to think the scale, probably, I think they did pre-COVID, they were doing probably about $600-700 million in revenue. So during football season, they have a stadium that seats 110,000 people, and they'll sell that out pretty much every week. They're currently building a $326 million basketball stadium. So when you think college, it is...
The scale is crazy.
The scale is immense. And so you have that, and they're across. And that also means, obviously, football and basketball. That also means all the Olympic sports, swimming, diving, gymnastics, baseball team as well. They've got... So all these other sports that sit around that, rowing, whatever you can think of. So it's a whole ecosystem that sits there. And then you have minor league teams. You have obviously the Formula One here at COTA, Circuit of the Americas. So you've got all this stuff happening. And then going...
And I guess you have too much of your time, right? You had too much of your time, or you were not sleeping enough. And so you said, like, what can I do?
I've got, 3 kids and a job and everything else. So I was like, I've got a lot of time on my hands. What should I do? But I said, as an outsider coming in, I think there's a real opportunity to champion this ecosystem and organise it, basically herd the cats there. So Sports Innovation Texas is a not-for-profit. It's the Austin and Central Texas Industry Association, so representing members and people in the community, and then working within the entire Texas Triangle ecosystem. So for those that don't know Texas, you might have just heard Cowboys, Big Hats, all that kind of stuff. Actually incredibly vibrant modern economy. If it's, as a state, if its GDP was listed alongside nations, it's in the top 10 in the world. I think it's just above Italy in terms of the actual GDP.
Really?
It's got about 28 million people within the Texas Triangle, which is the main cities of Dallas in the north, Dallas-Fort Worth, down to the east of Houston, across to Austin, then down to San Antonio. You've got some of the world's most valuable sports franchises, obviously Dallas Cowboys. And from Austin, everything is a 3-hour drive. So it's 3 hours to Dallas. It's about 2 and a bit hours to Houston and about an hour to San Antonio. So for people that don't know, you have this very well-connected ecosystem of sports, of tech. Obviously, Austin, Oracle moving in, Elon Musk and all his associated businesses moved here. We've got South by Southwest coming up next month, big innovation conference. So there's a lot going on. So that was just something that I thought there's a great opportunity here to grow this. And also selfishly, I'm in Austin for the next little bit, so I want to bring the world to me, so I don't have to get on a plane as much.
Yeah, that's not being selfish. Actually, now I have a better understanding as well, because one of our first invitees, Kyle Bunch, that was on the Global Sports Venture Studio. He's also starting a new entrepreneur journey, and actually moved back to Texas and close to Dallas. So now I understand why as well, in terms of like the whole ecosystem around it, especially for sports tech. So Carl's, definitely need to come by.
Carl's on our advisory board for Sports Innovation Texas. So currently kind of at RGA and the Global Sports Venture Studio. So he's same thing. So you get people cropping up that you kind of look under rocks, and you have all these people that are here. Yeah, so it's a great ecosystem. It's also just a great place to live. So I would say if you are looking at expanding to the US, it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley. I don't
New
think
York or Silicon Valley.
Yeah, or New York. I mean, expensive, difficult places to live. Austin's in the center of the country, so if you do need to get to either of those, jump on a plane and you can go coast to coast. But the final point is also very low business tax and 0% state income tax. So you can also understand why someone like an Elon Musk would want to come here.
Yeah, quite attractive, I guess. Quite attractive. I will make sure to come back to South by Southwest. That was a great event. Not this year yet, but hopefully with the pandemic behind us at some point, I will definitely need to come back. I was inviting you on the podcast because I wanted you to share some insights, given like the article we shared on Sports Pro, like we said, and also knowing you a bit as an influencer, not half naked, but almost half naked. I wanted maybe to share with some thoughts on the industry. And I wanted first to have a look back at last year, like 2021, and potentially one of the big things that hit the sports world with back in early 2021, the NFTs, like no one knew about this word before. And all of a sudden with Dapper Labs and everything that the pandemic has given us constraint to the sports organizations that came in. And so I wanted to have your opinion around, like, should sports develop actionable NFTs and how they should do it, and why NFTs matter and how we should approach it if we are a right holder or even an entrepreneur.
Well, I think the short answer is yes, they should, with the caveat that it depends on the needs of your sports organization. I think we fall into trouble when we start to group sports all together as this amorphous blob in terms of rights holders and sports properties, in the same way we get into trouble when we group NFTs, crypto, fan tokens, Web 3.0 in general. I mean, there's a lot of nuances there. So for larger sporting organizations, if an NFT is a way that you can further engage and connect with your fans with the added benefit of monetization, then go for it. I think that's something that's there. If you are a smaller, much smaller rights holder, I think it needs to be, I would say don't rush into it. I think it needs to be better thought out. Not to say that big organizations are rushing into it, but at the end of the day, it needs to be part of a broader strategy. It can't be seen as something that sits off to the side. So the example that I use is speaking with Dr. Julian Tan, who's formerly the head of digital initiatives and esports at Formula One. And he talked about esports in Formula One. It wasn't just something that they kind of tacked on. It was actually part of a broader strategy of how do we engage our fans.
The fans, yeah.
And I think NFTs as an emerging technology, as the kind of hottest buzzword that's happening here, it's going, well, how does it fit into your broader fan engagement strategy? So where does that sit? And if you're not doing things in collectibles or digital collectibles to begin with, then just rushing into NFTs and minting a whole bunch of NFTs in this space when you don't really know if you've got demand can be really quite a dangerous proposition. My personal preference is for actionable NFTs. I think the example, so that rather than just it being a digital collectible, essentially a bit of art, there is something that is linked to that, other benefits.
With a physical reward or something? Not necessarily.
It can be. It can be if that makes sense. I think again, it's a bit of a obfuscating answer, but if it actually makes sense, or a small part of it. I mean, the Australian Open with their NFTs that they did at the recent AO, they had one element that was physical, basically if a championship. So what they did is, for anyone that doesn't know, they split up the court into little 10 by 10 squares of the court, and then if a match-winning point landed on your little section, on that area that your NFT is linked to, then you would get kind of stats, and that would be updated and reflected in that NFT. And that they were these tennis balls that were made from the colors were chosen by an algorithm. So kind of really cool digital initiative. And then the championship winning point, if that landed there, you would actually get a physical tennis ball, basically replicating whatever your NFT was in a display case. So saying that not everyone who got these NFTs would get that physical one, it was just, this is an extra special thing. So I think for sports franchises, teams, whatever else that is, look at it in the same way that you would give benefits to your members or to your most loyal fans, and go, is there a digital equivalent that I can do? And does that change if a fan can't get to a stadium? I mean, this is something that we talked about last year, JB, was if I've got fans in Singapore and they're never going to make it to, I don't know, see Paris Saint-Germain in person, how can I still give them some sort of benefit that is digital, in addition to maybe, actual merch and things like that? Is there something that I can add on as a layer to this? And NFTs offer that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And actually the AO example is a perfect execution. And I really like also the arty part of this, where honestly, I mean, I've been watching different NFT use cases in sports, but beyond as well, with music or other forms of entertainment. But that one was very much arty, which gives also a new flavor to it, and potentially attract, like you said, long-term plan is actually to engage with the audience, reward them as part of your loyalty program if you want. And yeah, I really like this recent example. I was just thinking while you were mentioning it, it's a lot of people also are speaking with NFTs around not just money laundering, but also like all the troubles or problems like the fraud. And we've seen the recent example of Barcelona, or even Man City. Is like, I don't know, is it something that with your clients, or how do you navigate this? Because every time there's a new technology, there are pitfalls. It's not easy. There is also the environmental issues around the minting, and the resources and the energy it requires. How do you address all of this in terms of like, you need to have a plan, you need to have a long-term strategy. It might not be perfect today, but still have a look, start with building the first blocks. How does it look like? What would be the main recommendations you would have, even for, like you said, a tier 2 or tier 3 organization?
Treat it like any other supplier or partner. I think in the same way that you would do due diligence on whoever's providing, say, your stadium, who's doing the food and beverage service. I mean, you look into their capabilities, you look into, can they say what they're going to do? Is there references? That's a very basic example of something that's very, old school, if you want to put it. It's not really tech enabled, but treat it the same way for new tech. I think if you don't understand it, don't move forward with it. And if they can't explain, the vendor, the kind of that's selling to you can't explain in very understandable, concrete terms what the value is that you're getting and what they're providing, then they probably don't know it themselves. Or if they do, then they probably can't do it. So that's one of those things that I think sports need to kind of understand, the FOMO of missing out on the, fear of missing out on the next wave of technology, but realize that this stuff is not, it's not a flash in the pan. It's sticking around for a long time. So you think about Web 3.0 and you think about crypto and everything else, is see it as a platform shift. This is a mindset shift. This isn't just a new class of whatever, some sort of sponsorship deal or a new class of something that's existing. This is the whole platform, and I guess view of the world and how we operate and interact with each other is shifting. So if you go to the example of Web 1.0, if someone was coming in and selling you a website and saying, hey, I've got this new thing that's called the internet, you should get a website for your football club, and you turn around and go, well, I don't need that. Okay, well, whatever, I'll chuck one up, and it's useless, it's not functional, or it's a gimmick. And you think, then I'm going to build everything else that a modern website does in kind of Web 2.0 where we are now.
Yeah.
So everything that kind of touch point for your club, your ticketing, your registration, your content, everything else. And you say, if you had your time again, would you have just whacked on something just to say that you have a website, or would you have looked at building something that is a platform to take you forward into that? So that's why I'm saying that this whole area needs to be looked at as holistic and a platform change and a mentality change. But you need to drill down into each one and go, well, what's right for me? So that's where the nuance comes into. So rather than just saying, oh, NFTs, crypto token, fan tokens, all that kind of stuff, we're just going to do something and all this stuff. Go, what's the need? How do we do it? How do we find suppliers or vendors that we trust? And if they're promising something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, to a certain extent, what you've just described is like, if you take the holistic approach, is like NFT is just one part of the metaverse or the second big trends we've seen in 2021. So this new version or this new generation of the internet where we would have a 3D spatial computing also added to what we see as a Web 2.2 version of the internet. But NFT just adds on the ownership. So the idea that you have like a digital right management of any assets that you have. And so, okay, NFTs are here to stay, just like the metaverse. And if we take it more broadly, is where I want you to come in with all of that is like NFT was beginning of 2021. And then because of Zuckerberg and everything that came in, all of a sudden, again, we had this huge splash around the metaverse and all the buzz around Meta and what it means for the industry. And so for me, NFTs are part of this Web3 new proposition and kind of this new fourth industrial revolution, if we can say like that. But for sports organizations, so a team, a league, a franchise, whomever, how can you help them navigate, or what would be for you the right approach to leverage the metaverse? We know they need a presence within the metaverse. Like, it will sound very much stupid if you don't have a website today, just like what you explained. But what would be the approach? Why the metaverse matters, and what would be the approach, more or less?
Yeah, so as I said, it's shifting your thinking to understanding how people will interact with you and how they will live their lives, just generally. And sports is one element of that. So I think it's kind of taking the blinkers off of going, well, how is it with sports? It's going, well, how is it with how people just interact generally? And you can use the example of shifts to card rather than cash. That was not driven by sports. That's something that impacted sports and how people wanted things. And mobile ticketing, not driven by sports, something that people were just used to doing everything on their phones. And that's how they lived their lives and that's how they interacted. So sports had to respond to be able to keep pace with that. So I'd say it's
the same here.
It's the same
for
here.
You. It's kind of behaviors. Yeah. Okay.
Through the metaverse, through the digital, that virtual self, essentially. So how do you leverage that is just, first of all, taking a step back and going, sports doesn't have all the answers to this, and you look at where it's successful. So I'd say that's why these game companies, and obviously the recent Microsoft or proposed Microsoft acquisition of Activision. Blizzard, that's something that is just huge, and the valuations around that are immense, is because they are probably the closest we have at the moment to realizing the metaverse or realizing the metaverses, multiple versions of. So I would say that it doesn't have to be a big dive in. You can you can change your thinking, but then you can dip your toe in the water with some activations in places like that, whether it's like with Fortnite or something else like that. That's something that it's kind of it's hurry up and wait, essentially. It's understand your strategy for this, understand how you can make meaningful impacts and signal to your fans that you are heading that way, but then not realizing that you have to completely digitize or create virtual everything. It's I love this quote by I think it's attributed to Stephen Fry. I don't know if it's actually from him, but he was talking about e-readers and saying that an e-reader, so a Kindle or something else like that, a digital book, is no more a risk to the existence of books than escalators are to staircases. You know, we have this shift and this update in technology, but that doesn't mean everything today needs to be shifted over to this. It just means that there is a huge change coming and you need to get prepared. So I would say work with existing partners that have wins on the board. So that's something that the AO example we said, they had a series of partners that back that. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I think there was about 4 or 5 different partners they worked at for that activation. So it's things like that. It's going, all right, how are we gonna put this through, and having a roadmap for what it is. So that's something that, Dapper Labs, obviously, with everything they're doing with NFTs, Top Shot. I keep saying Top Shot. I was interviewing Jane Pericini, who's a VP of growth at Dapper Labs for the podcast, and I think I said Top Shot more than I said Top Shot. It's incredibly confusing. You get an well, I guess, but that's where it's going as well.
It was nice to you. He didn't say anything. It was nice to you. He didn't say anything.
NFT, and wearables for shirts. I think that is also where it's going. So not far off, but proven partners like that, I would say work around that, and then also probably either externally or look within your internal capabilities and have someone who's responsible for this as a new specific role around strategy for this. So it's not something where you just kind of push it off to a sponsorship person and say, how can we kind of squeeze a few more dollars out of this? You go, all right, who is actually responsible in our organization
to internalize a bit the knowledge and also leverage the different partners and departments that you can bring on for these kind of new activations.
Yeah, definitely. For small organizations, that might be going to an external consulting service. That might be something that you go out to. But it needs to be thought of as a new future that someone needs to be preparing strategy for, because it's still in its early stages. So it's not at the point that you can say there is a winner or there is a platform, or you definitely should do this. You should be on, we're not in a MySpace versus Facebook kind of thing, or, CDs versus tapes. There's a thing where it's going, this is coming, this is growing. It is not mature enough that we have the key providers that are going to work with this. Or multiple providers. That's the other thing about this being decentralized. And
that's the goal. It is to be decentralized. So ultimately, and actually, just like you said, I mean, the game engine, which is the construction tool, if you want, of this metaverse is clearly something, I think, above the weight of many of the sports organizations. None of them can really pretend to do that. And actually, that's why it's only Microsoft or big tech companies that can actually do this. I like the approach of leveraging and understanding where to have the quick wins or trying to navigate this world through the partners that you have. I really like it. Just if I'm looking a bit ahead, like this was, I think, the buzzwords like NFTs and metaverse. But if I'm more looking like the exercise that Sports Pro asked you to do in terms of like trends to watch in 2022. One of them was around the DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Can you briefly tell us what you think of it? How do you see it in the future? How this can impact sports organizations or not? What could be the benefit? I would like to have your take a bit on DAOs.
So DAOs, as said, acronym, essentially what it is, just for the people that don't know, is a new blockchain-enabled way of running an organization. And whether that is a charity, whether that's a sporting organization, whether that's a company, It's all about member representation. So people will buy into the DAO. There'll be a series of rules that are written up. So comparing it to a corporation where you have a shareholder agreement, people buy shares in the company. That gives them certain rights to vote on things, and away you go. Whereas this is on the blockchain, so you have smart contracts. So you write up those rules, and then once those rules are met, it automatically results in actions. So the very kind of, I guess, lofty ambition for it is a completely flat structure where everyone has a right, everyone buys in, everyone gets this one vote for whatever unit they own of the DAO, and then they can pool their resources, kind of like crowdfunding essentially, and then go out and control or buy another asset or invest or whatever else it is. That's where the lofty ambition is. What it actually looks like in reality is probably more along the lines of, as I said, kind of a modern corporation with shareholder agreements, which are the rules. And you have different voting classes. You have different people will have different rights based on either when they buy in or how much they buy in, where they buy in, all that kind of stuff, which has huge capabilities for sports organizations. So one of the things is talked about a lot is the valuation of sports is through the roof. There's only so many billionaires on the planet. How do you actually look for people that can purchase these sports clubs? And what's being promoted is the idea that you have a DAO, you get everyday fans, pool their resources, then acquire either a majority or a minority stake in a sports organizations, and then can vote on anything and everything in how that club is run. That's the theory, at least, and I think we're going to see some examples of that. For my 2 cents, I think that sounds like absolute chaos.
Is it realistic? I wanted to ask, is it really realistic?
It's not realistic for the efficient running of an organization, regardless of what it is. I think that idea of that one-to-one democracy is a really nice ideal. But in terms of actually running an organization, that doesn't make sense. So what I think we are going to see when this all shakes out, and again, it's one of those things that is here to stay. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not a trend or a fad. It is something that's enabled by blockchain where you can have that ownership and that incredible control, and it's verified to you. You are 100%, that is yours, and everything's automated in that. So as the smart contracts. So that's where I think it's really powerful. If you think about a membership group, either owning a minority or majority, probably a minority stake. And then what gives them power is the ability to then leverage it like shareholders do. You can help vote for the board of directors. You can help vote for whatever the approvals are. If there's a hiring of a new coach or major decisions like that, or signing of a new player, everyone can have their vote on that. And you have that kind of influence in that way. In terms of voting on who's starting at what position, what color is
scouting,
who's scouting, all that kind of stuff, that doesn't make sense. And I think anyone who's a sports fan, myself included, diehard fan of the West Coast Eagles and the Australian Football League. Our coach Adam Simpson is a incredible coach with decades of experience in football. I may have opinions, and I may have opinions that I share quite loudly at the pub on the weekend, especially after we've lost. I don't think I should be running the football club, and I don't think masses of people either. And we see that in public votes, democracy and elections aside. You see things like the vote for naming new. I think it was naming a new boat, and everyone online jumped on and said it should be called Boaty McBoatface. And so you had this new research vessel, I think it was in the UK, that ended up being called Boaty McBoatface because everyone decided to vote for that. So obviously with DAOs and the way that it's linked, you need to verify people, and there's things that you can put into that smart contract where you can kind of block out trolls. But it really does have a power to reward loyalty in the sense of if you've been a member of the club for 20 years and you get your share of this DAO, you can come in at a higher voting level or have more rights or vote on a broader range of things than other people that, are maybe newer fans. So it's kind of rewarding that loyalty again. That's what I'm saying is that sports hasn't essentially changed in terms of our relationship to sports. People are still passionate about sports. It's just the medium through which we do that and what's open for that. So I think there's huge potential there for rewarding fans. And it just needs to be tempered with what's actually practical in the sense of governance.
Yeah, I guess to a certain extent that's not really realistic, but I hear you, and I kind of share the view and your opinion. I think for me, DAOs also will have a massive impact in terms of investment vehicle, especially on how private equity comes in now into sports and everything. And I think having a slice for every person that can come together as well, I think that will have a major impact. But one thing I wanted to come back on your piece again, it's like you mentioned something around passive data collection in sports performance, which is one of the most overhyped sports technology trends, if I remember well. Can you explain that better in terms of like, is it without real recommendations that the data come in without like real insights to the users, or is it around the technology? I mean, passive data collections as one of the most overhyped sports technology trends. I'm interested and intrigued as well.
So that's coming from essentially a whole bunch of different views, but it summed up very well in a quote from Dr. Tom Waller, who we interviewed for the podcast. He used to be SVP of innovation. He was the Chief Science Officer at Lululemon. Now he's the Senior Vice President of Innovation at Adidas, depending on where you're at in the world. And he said basically when they assess a new piece of technology, is it just another set of bathroom scales? Is it just another set of digital bathroom scales? Is it something that I stand on it and it just gives me information, doesn't give me context, doesn't give me recommendations, doesn't help me improve? Is that what that is? And I think there's a rush in the performance space with people getting very excited about everything that's happening and how you can track and that becoming more common, that devices are just more devices, more things, more measurements, don't actually translate to improvement. So that's where something like Whoop has had a lot of success with the Whoop score. I mean, that's a very basic way of, it does track all this stuff and then it tells you recommendations based off that.
Yeah.
So I think that
it's a bit the contextualization and a bit understanding. I mean, the contextualization and understanding more of the data to give you like better insights or better information that matters. Okay.
Yeah. And also the analysis engine on the back end. So, AI, artificial intelligence powered things, whether how much that is AI and how much that is just some more basic analysis, varies from company to company. But the idea that you can actually input all this information and then the processing muscle behind it will actually show you this is what you need to know. And then the other layer of that is this is what you need to know at that point in time. So that's something that's in the human performance space is actually going, this is contextual information. This is drawn from huge amount of data sources, put together in a way that a human can understand and given to them when they need it rather than when it doesn't make sense. So that's big. I think that industry is not going to slow down. All of the big tech have gone into it. Amazon Halo, Google's active in it, Apple, obviously Whoop is a kind of a challenger, $3.6 billion valuation, but they're still very much considered a challenger in the space compared to big tech. So that's something to watch to the point that it'll become much more ubiquitous. It'll become much more common for all of us to just be tracking our health and then getting insights from that.
Yeah, I agree. And then we come to the, I would say, not very mature and very low maturity market of fitness, wellness, where there is high potential for growth in the coming years. I'm sorry, Thomas. I didn't watch the time, but I think we've reached the time for this podcast. But before we stop, just for our listeners, I like to ask at the end a bit, like if you can recommend, like maybe a book, a series, a movie that you've read or watched recently, or that something long time still with you. Any kind of like inspiration for our listeners?
I mean, there's probably countless business and tech books and series and stuff I can recommend. I'm actually going to bit of a sideways jump on this one and say lots of sports narrative documentaries, which is, we're in a real golden age of it, original sports content. I mean, something like Drive to Survive, Making Their Mark was the Amazon one about AFL football. The Test is about the Australian cricket team. Thinking of other ones, I mean, Tom Brady's one, Man in the Arena, is on at the moment. That's a little bit sanitized look at him and everything that's happened, but still, I think things like that, because it reminds you of, this is sports, and the kind of the passion and all the stuff we started talking about at the beginning. It's maybe a little bit of an antidote to the view of just this is an industry, if that makes sense. It kind of brings back to, well, what is the excitement of sports? How is this looking? And just realize it's people. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just people that, for all their frailties and strengths, both physical and mental, sometimes moral, if you want to say that. But it's just a reminder of what this is, and I guess why people are so excited about it,
passionate
about it, all that kind of stuff. So they're that, and then So I would say that, just as a bit of a brain rinse, a little refresher.
That's fine with me, and don't worry if you have any other suggestions, just send an email and we will add it to the description of the podcast for the listeners if you have other ideas.
Sports Tech Feed, the Global Sports Technology Podcast.
Yeah.
There you go.
Of course.
Terrible self-promotion. I'm a terrible influencer.
Amazing one. No, that's perfect. Thank you, Thomas, for the time and sharing the insights. That was a pleasure. And all the best to you in Texas, where I should be coming soon, I guess.
Definitely, mate. We'll go get some barbecue and breakfast tacos.
Cheers, man.
Thanks, JB.
See you.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoy it as much as we love creating them. If you like the episode, feel free to comment, rate, and share with people around you. You can visit our website, www.lastsource.io, to learn more about our activities. You will discover a wide range of articles and can subscribe to our newsletter to receive the latest tech and sports news in your mailbox every month. Stay tuned for new episodes.
Le corner.